I want to give a big thank you to all my patrons, and I'll be doing a Kingsguard roll call after today's video. Welcome back to the Fantasy Network, everyone. My name is, of course, Jimmy Nuts, and today we're going to be talking in no spoiler fashion about Jade City by Fonda Lee. This was Fonda Lee's debut fantasy novel for adults. She had written some YA science fiction before this, and I think maybe a short story, but this was that first foray into adult fantasy, and this was a massive success. Won the World Fantasy Award. I think it was up for like Nebula, among other awards, and a lot of people did take note of Jade City, and then, you know, obviously the bigger Green Bone Saga, which consists of Jade War and Jade Legacy after Jade City. This is a book I've been very excited to review. It has a different feel to it. It's not medieval inspired, which was definitely one of the intents Fonda Lee had when she started out writing Jade City in the Green Bone Saga, and it is a welcomed breath of fresh air. This is an extremely hyped book. I've had so many people come to me in the comments and say, I got to read Jade City, I got to read Green Bone. It'll change your life. It's wild. And while I'm not saying this is one of my favorite books of all time, it is certainly hard to imagine a book one going much better than this, even though there are just a couple things for my subjective reading taste that maybe would have preferred to be a bit different. But as a whole package of what Jade City has offered to me, I really enjoyed it.
Maybe we should change the background lighting a bit.
You're right, Bobby B. Maybe I should I'll give it a go. Maybe we should change up the vibe. That doesn't look very good, does it?
No, it looks like shit.
Yeah, anyways. Back to our normal lighting. So what is Jade City all about? It's about a generation removed from a massive conflict where a cultural revolution happens, a national liberation fights back and overthrows foreign occupancy. And from that, we get the One Mountain Society, which kind of led this movement and took over Kekon, which is the place where this story takes place, this continent. Following a dispute opening up Kekon to international trade, the One Mountain Society unfortunately begins to splinter and then fractions into multiple families, tribes, territories, factions. You get the point. The two most powerful of these factions at the end of the day ended up being the Mountain Clan, which is led by the Eight family, more of an isolationist approach. They don't really want to do any international foreign trade. And then you have the No Peak Clan that is led by the Call family, which is where most of our POVs come into play. You have Shay, Call, Hilo, Lon. Their names are usually abbreviated and have much longer, but those are the ones that you'll end up knowing them by. And they are very much internationalist and believe in opening up the trade and strengthening Kekon. So these are two different fundamental beliefs on how the country should be ran, and you can see that there is some conflict there already. A lot of people talk about Jade City and the Green Bone Saga being very mafia driven, and that's a pretty accurate description. I mean, you know, obviously in The Godfather, the Corleone family has all different types of Don, underbosses, yada, yada, yada. Here you have a kind of hierarchy of power where you have fist and then, well, the horn, the fist, the fingers. I had to really try to remember that and pound that into my head. And then outside of the family, you have the Lantern Men, which are business owners. So much like the mafia, all businesses kind of run through the families or the clans, and you have to pay your dues. And they kind of get to tell you who does and does not have the right to do business, and you want to keep in the good graces of them. Obviously, they're protected. The Lantern Men were business owners that actually helped out back in the day whenever they were overthrowing the foreign occupation, and they are being rewarded continue to be Lantern Men and sponsored businesses from the clans. People in the clans who can handle Jade are called Green Bones, and you might be wondering, what is Jade? Well, Jade is a mineral that endows the wearer for enhanced abilities. There are 6 principles that one must master, while also having a genetic makeup that makes them able to actually use this. And those 6 disciplines are strength, steel, perception, lightness, deflection, and channeling. There are even people who are supposed to be able to handle Jade and they can't, and we call them Stone Eyes, but the Aboriginals on Kekon are actually immune to it completely, and the outsiders of Kekon, they actually can't handle it. They're too sensitive. It gives them the itches. It's a bad thing. Kind of resembles maybe withdrawals and addiction and these type of things, but the people who can actually handle it the best are someone who are Aboriginal and outsider and the mixing of those genetics, and that tends to lead to all the green bones in the clans. One thing that I would like to note is I do feel like this isn't a hard magic system, which I kind of hate that terminology anyways, but it is definitely a little bit more detailed, and it feels kind of like a blend of science fiction within the story. And I think Fonda Lee did this on purpose. The fact that foreigners think that this is something that can be explained away with science, while the people who are actually using the jade on Kekon feel much more mystical about this, much more awe, and then fantastical would be the way I would describe it. So it's interesting that you have different perspectives on these abilities within the world itself, and it makes it for one of my more favorite modern magic systems, we'll call it, in fantasy so far. And that kind of covers what this book is about. You can guess from there, with the new generation of green bones taking over and the fearless leader who is really our main characters, the entire clan's grandfather, kind of retiring. You can feel this new wave and this new era of green bones taking over. And it's fascinating because also in this time period, it seems like technology has advanced as well. There are airplanes, there's guns. So this isn't, obviously it's not medieval, but it's even in a different kind of era with different technology. And I really, really like the fact that those two things are coinciding, that you have new people taking over who are calling the shots that may not be doing it the exact same way as the old guard who liberated their people, which there's a lot of tension there, but also in the fact that the technology proposes new challenges and adoptions from the clans as well, and how they will use that to get to their means, to what they want. The opening of Jade City is actually one of my favorite parts. I think that it does such a nice job of setting the tone of this series, and you kind of immediately say, I haven't read anything quite like this. And if there's one of the biggest praises that I can kind of heave onto this thing, is the fact that it did feel fresh and it did feel new. I haven't read anything quite like this in fantasy. And even if you're not so much into the whole mafia thing, I think you could take a step back and just say, if you like family dramas, power struggles, territorial feuds, this can work for you. The mafia stuff is not so over the top that it's like, well, if you didn't watch Godfather, you're never going to like this. I don't think that's the case. So I want to put a lot of people at ease with this. But the opening of it has everything. It has the languages coming in, the dialogue, you have action, and there just seems to be a strong sense of danger that can happen at any time. This world feels dangerous from the set out, but also we see kind of the class structure set up here in the first chapter or prologue or whatever it was. And it's one of the strongest beginnings to a book that I've read in quite a while. This book does a very nice job of setting out that there has been a passage of time and that people have existed prior to this. There's a real sense of history and a bit of religion that's mixed in there too, which I also really, really appreciated. And it was nice to see a book where there's a lot of superstition that radiates through people's interactions and discussions and their inner monologue when we have, some of the call kids, which are Hilo, Lon, Andon's like part of the family, but we also have Shay. And when they interact with each other or they think about the decisions they're going to be making, you feel a little bit of that superstition that plays into their lives because of the history and because of the religion. And it's nice seeing that play into character motivations without them having to be an overly holy, self-righteous character. A lot of times we only see those things with like the designated religious character. That doesn't seem to be the case here. And I think that it's a little bit of a new take on this. They don't have to be as holy as the Pope to feel the superstition. And if you think about it, in our world, religion may not have such a strong hand in everyone's life, but there are things that we hear as kids or in bypassing that does provide like a sense of superstition when we make decisions or we go through certain things. And I think that that's a really valid human thing that Fonda Lee delicately put into this book without being heavy-handed at all. And I really appreciated that. I also really loved just how tight the story was, coming in at right about 500 pages, which is, for a fantasy book, decently short. Maybe that's a mid-sized fantasy book. But each event tying into each of the POVs was really nice. And we see the reactions and also the impact that it has on the individual person and also what they're thinking the other POV might be thinking. And each one of these feels distinct and different from each other. They have different types of thoughts. They all don't see the world through the same lens, which does happen a lot of time in multiple POVs, which I always question why authors reach for multiple POVs in the first place. Is it just because it's something to do and that's what's commercially viable in fantasy, or are they going to use it to a greater extent? And I do think that Fonda Lee, for the most part here, does use it in great effect. Fonda Lee does a phenomenal job of showing worry and anxiety, and where that will lead you to feeling that you have to be someone that's powerful like Lon. Or you have Hilo, who has so many misjudgments and miscues due to his arrogance and borderline narcissism, I would say. He will see an event through a totally different scope, where he's like, oh, that poor girl, where like Shay's thinking in her head, like, Hilo is a jerk off. And it's just, it's good. You know, I feel like I'm truly in that POV's head. So the lens of the POVs are very specific to the characters, which is a sign, I think, of a good character writer, but also in the fact that the events do not become just straight, right? We don't go into the timeline, go up and then down, and then we're finished. It begins to make the events look like a spiral. And this is something that Steven Erikson told me that had a profound impact on the way that I think about plots and stories and POVs. And Fonda Lee definitely has made events in her book, even ones that are in the generation prior, to be spirals. Depending on what POV you're on, you might be seeing it from a whole different perspective, or in thinking who's wrong and who's right and who you're rooting for. And my favorite character actually out of the entire book, we have some people in the Call clan, some people aren't, like Beru is definitely up there for me, which might be a little bit of a hot take, but I really loved Shay in this book. And Shay is kind of the black sheep. She was kind of her grandfather's favorite grandchild, but she had ran off with a boy of a foreign country, which is obviously a big no-no in Kekon. That's frowned upon. And she's coming back. Things didn't work out. She's coming back. So we see this person who was revered as a child to almost be the grandpa's favorite, chosen one. And he's this war hero. He is, he's like the George Washington of Kekon for all of us Americans. And he is so disappointed in what she has become and the decisions that she has made. And this is a relationship that I think is interesting because it's messy. And it also speaks to something that a lot of people go through. In your life, you may be seen as the golden child or the favorite nephew or grandson or father or son or daughter, probably more like. And as soon as you take your own agency and you make decisions, you betray what that person had bestowed on you for what your future was. And it hurts. It hurts. I think most people can kind of relate to this feeling, that sense of, you know, you're the perfect little angel has now been fractured. And Shay's POV, we get to explore that, and it's worth exploring. And through her grandfather's eyes, she was perfect until she made her own decisions. So is that true love? Is that true admiration? I don't know. And their interactions in this book were some of my favorites, actually, throughout all of the pages. And when you talk about Green Bone Saga, I think everyone always mentions Hilo. And what I will say is, and I have to preface this, I've only read Jade City, so let me figure out on my own how I feel about him in later installments, if he's there, is with Hilo, he's a bit of a jerk. Like, I'm not rooting for Hilo in the least. I think he sucks. But what I'm not saying is that he's a bad character. I think that he is actually a really well-crafted character. He certainly has the, you know, too cool for school, I'm a bad boy, with a bit of a soft side. I actually found that Wen was a lot more rootable, I guess I would say. I would cheer for her more so than Hilo. But the story, without a doubt, is more interesting because Hilo is in it, and he is a bit of a loose cannon, is he not? So when I say I'm not rooting for Hilo, I don't mean that I think he is a bad character. I just happen to think that he's a bit of a jerk, and curious to see where all that ends up. But Lon was extremely easy for me to latch onto, with the sense of responsibility and power that he is having to kind of take control of and lead this family. Really relatable stuff, and also just really well done. I think that there's a lot of times where people talk about this power and this burden, and then you don't feel it. But I felt it in the text. And I'm, of course, going to comment on the writing here, because when someone points out something to be something special within the genre, I'm always excited to see if maybe a different type of writing style is being implemented, or a very significant author voice that is, you know, a standout. And that is something that, in my opinion, Jade City does not have a lot of. Now, that can be a good or a bad thing. This is completely dependent on the reader. I will say I generally like a more distinct writing style. I don't think that this writing is bad by any means. It is almost invisible, as some would say. And depending on who you are and you're watching this video, that might be a good or bad thing, but I just wanted to put that out there. The writing itself is just not super notable, but it's clearly relaying a very impassioned story, a very inspired story, and it never gets in the way, which some people would say is the perfect amount of prose, right? The perfect amount of style is just to relay the story and get it out there. I'll leave that up to you to decide, but I didn't think that there was any sort of voice, but it's also not super plain. It does have a lot of really good descriptions that appeal to the senses, vivid imagery, and the action and dialogue. The lines of dialogue I really enjoyed, and the action scenes were fantastic. You can tell Fonda Lee knows her stuff. I believe she's a black belt in a couple different martial arts. Felt very Matrix-y to me at some points, which I'm always down for. Big fan of Neo. With the writing, my only problems I had were not the lines of dialogue themselves, but the dialogue, the things around the dialogue and the dialogue tags. A lot of times you'll see people give writing advice and they'll say, you know, don't say said over and over and over again. Though in some literary circles, they say you should only say Hilo said, right? There are times in this book where I felt there was an effort to not reuse tags, and then some of them would become almost overly descriptive for me. And what I mean by that is just like, you know, excelled wildly, Hilo excelled wildly, or whatever it might be. And it just became obvious and kind of took me out of the story a little bit. That is a super subjective thing. I'm not saying that is a objective con to this book or negative, but that is something that I noticed in my experience. And for a book that had me gripped for 500 pages, those were the only moments where I got taken out of the world just a little bit. I am actually a person that doesn't like dialogue tags at all. I actually enjoy whenever you have to figure out who's saying what, because I believe if your characters are distinct enough, which Fonda Lee's are, in my opinion, you can actually tell who is saying what. I doubt that that is how the majority of you feel watching this video. I imagine that a lot of modern fantasy readers just want to get through it to find out what's happening, because whenever you do have dialogue, the action comes to a halt and you're not propelling yourself forward in the narrative. So I get it. I'm probably alone on that, but that's just my personal taste, and I have to mention it because, hey, it's my review, my video. The other thing around the dialogue that did bother me a little bit is that it felt like there would be some internal monologue, which is fine and natural, I would say, but there were times where we'd almost like flash back to a childhood memory or to a time not so far past and get some more context around the conversation and why our POV is feeling the way they are. At times, it just felt like it kind of broke the immersion again with the conversation, and one of the reasons why it stuck out so much to me is because the actual lines of dialogue that they were speaking were really, really good. And that brings me to my next point about this writing, is that this is very, very adaptable for television, in my opinion. I know it's been picked up and supposedly this is going to be adapted. I don't know if it's like Peacock or CBS. I don't know the status of this adaptation, but it doesn't surprise me at all that someone picked this up, because I think you will be able to pick up lines of dialogue directly from the book and stick them in the show, much like Game of Thrones. But also in the way the chapters are paced. This is a book that you can almost see the scene ending on screen, or you can feel the episode coming to a close with the cliffhanger for the next episode and being like, wow, I can't wait. And I have found that books that are written like this, kind of like George R. R. Martin, Scott Lynch, John Gwynne, Evan Winters also writes in this way. I think that makes a book more bingeable for some reason. And whenever you know right when they end the chapter, you just have a talent for that, things stick in my brain more as a reader, and I'd love to know what you think about that. That made this reading experience a whole hell of a lot better, and I really enjoyed it. So I've mentioned a couple things that, you know, just kind of irked me subjectively in my reading experience around the dialogue. And the other thing that I would say is I enjoyed the first half of this book more than the second half. Not that the second half was bad, but I felt like we had this momentum building and it was going crazy, lots of twists and turns. And then at some point, the momentum slows down because we have to process things, and the momentum never picked back up. It never got quite there. And to use a finger in a mountain example like I always do, it felt like we came here and we had to dip down, which is fine, to come back up, but we just never reached that peak again. And I did lose a little bit of momentum in the back half of this book. I think the climax was really well done, exceptionally well written, and had really good tense moments. However, did not get my heart rate up. I never felt like, you know, that pulse pounding in my neck and my veins coming out of my head, which I did feel that earlier in the book. So I know that she is capable of doing that, and that's just my subjective experience with it. But it does leave me wondering where I will end up with the sequels. I already know that things are much different in Jade War and Jade Legacy. I've heard about time jumps and all other types of things. So I do wonder what my level of investment will be moving forward with this series. But without a doubt, Jade City is one of the more fresh, quick, clean, well-crafted stories that I've read in the last 5 years. I can see why this is such a standout and why so many people are just passionate about this series, because it is time for new stuff. And whenever you want to get out of that medieval slump and the same old, Chosen One, Farm Boy, blah, 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 blah. This is one you should reach for. 100%. It has such a different feel and it's so unique, and I appreciated it. I gotta pick up Jade War like soon. So when I get all these other commitments out of the way that I just have a couple, I'm going to be finishing Green Bone Saga. I would have, if I hadn't had any other commitments, I would have probably blitzed through this. If you've read the Green Bone Saga, please drop a comment down below. And also, just because I'm not cheering for Hilo doesn't mean you need to tell me if I'm going to in later books. Let me experience this. I know a lot of you that are watching this probably have read Jade War and Jade Legacy. Remember, I have only read Jade City. I almost put this review off to do the whole trilogy because a lot of times with a really tight POV and like we're intimate with the characters, people have feelings by the end of book 3 that I don't have the context for. And they will wonder why I'm not like the biggest Hilo fan. And it's simply just because that I haven't read the rest of the series yet. So let me experience it for myself, please. But drop down in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts for Jade City were. I know a lot of people loved it, but there are some people who didn't. And if it didn't work for you, I'd love to know why in the comments. And if it did work for you, I'd also love to know that. If you like this video, think about hitting like. If you dislike it, you can hit dislike. If you loved it, think about subscribing. I'll be reviewing the other 2 books in the Green Bone Saga. I will also be doing a spoiler discussion on Philip Chase's channel with a couple people that I'm very, very excited about. And hey, who knows? Maybe at the end of all 3 books, I will kind of do a bit of a wrap up and rank the books, or even talk more in spoiler territory, because I know a lot of people have reactions to this series, and that makes sense because shit goes down. I want to thank you for spending your time watching this video. There's a Patreon in the description. It's optional, but always appreciated. And until I see you next time, be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page. Shout out to all my patrons, which include my Wildlings Knights watching Kingsguard. My Kingsguard includes Lauren, Henrik, Kai, Eric B., Oscar Stewart, Stephen R., Kaika, Amanda, RJ Shaw, Nicoletta Tanner, Jennifer, Garrick, Frank C., Evie, Fever J., Sarah, Pat, Prithvi, Kevin, Ryan, Michael, Terrence, Wade, Darren, Taylor D, Derry, John C, Bass, Mitch, Sebastian, Benjamin, Jobot, Noel, Amanda L, Kyle C. Scott, Steve Talks Books, Caitlin S, Dylan M, Yolanda, Carlos, Nicholas, Chadia, Beesneys, Matthias, and John. Thank you all so much. You're the best.